Josh. Nice to meet you. Um, I did this really evil thing to Josh for this show. I essentially just sent him a box of sticks and a couple of photographs. So really nice job on the install. Thanks very much for that. So no, like the wall pieces, like yeah. Wow. Well, thanks very much. I mean, the show turned out great, and thanks very much for allowing me to be here. I think the show looks fabulous. It really was so much fun. You never really know. I mean, more than a lot of shows that I have sent off, if you do a framed work and you send it to a gallery, you pretty much know what you're going to see when you walk in a gallery. This one, it was a little dicey, but I think it just looks wonderful. I just took a million photos, and I'm very happy with everything, so I'm appreciative of that. So. Right now I'm on sabbatical, actually, so this is a bit unusual. I haven't talked in front of a group in like 4 months, 4.5 months going on, in addition to which I'm kind of on antihistamines today, so we'll see how this goes. If I start to fade off or if I start to get boring, maybe you can stand up and walk out or something, and I'll get the hint. Thanks for the introduction, John. A couple of things that I would like to maybe just sort of lay out as ground rules as we go here is that, I've got a lot of content here. I've got some images of works. I'm only going back about 3 years or so. I've got a body of work that I'm kind of putting, some of it's here, some of it's going to be in a show that I'm putting up in a week. If you're in Minneapolis, a week from Saturday, come on down to another opening at the Form and Content Gallery in Minneapolis. But I'm going back about 3 years, talking about a couple different things. I'm also only talking about sort of a bit of the work that I do. I do a number of things, and this is maybe a little bit hard to see. What we're looking at right here, this is actually a drawing. I do 2 bodies of work, one of which is kind of represented here, and another body of work, which I've got a couple images that I can show you. I work with layers of drawings and layers of resin, and build up drawings where I was sort of like draw an object, put a layer of resin down, draw another object, draw the object repeatedly. Can anyone tell what this drawing is? It's a pair of binoculars. And so there's actually 53 drawings here. And the drawings that I do are actually very thick. This is about 1.25 inches thick. So when you're standing in front of these, there's like little ghost images up in here that you can kind of see and kind of can't. And, another one that I've done. Can anyone tell what this one? This one's maybe a bit more recognizable. It's a power saw. Oh, so spaghetti history. That's just me, John. I'm sorry. It's not. I can't blame that on anybody. But so I have this other set of drawings that I do, this other set of work that I kind of I work with a gallery, they handle them, and that's great. But for me, I kind of have a bit of wanderlust in what I do. I look at the world through potential artworks, frankly. I think about the world in making artworks. That's sort of like my modus operandi. That's how I think. I don't really think as outside of the studio about the big things in my life. And so I find myself sort of wandering through a lot of different media, a lot of different material. But this is like half of my life here. This is half of my creative life is that, and that's all I'm going to show you about that. The other half are the things that we're going to be looking at tonight, and there's a pretty wide variety of things. So I'll be showing you a few things that look familiar. I'll be showing you some other things that are brand new that are going to be opening up in a couple days. I got one piece at the end that's only like 24 hours old, so we'll see if that makes a cut on this next week. So. But anyhow, I thought I would maybe start talking about the pieces in the gallery. And the title of this series of like all the pieces, the text pieces that are on the wall, actually comes from this Thoreau quote. This is a short lecture for Thoreau, was maybe like 2,000 words or so. In the intro to this particular essay on walking, he states, "I wish to speak a word for nature, for absolute freedom and wildness, as contrasted with a freedom and culture merely civil, to regard man as an inhabitant or a part and parcel of nature rather than a member of society. I wish to make an extreme statement. If so, I may make an emphatic one, for there are enough champions of civilizations to minister in the school committee, and every one of you will take care of that." I found this really interesting as I started to work on these particular the text pieces. And the title of the series is Nature Speaks. It's based on this. Became really fascinated with this quote by Thoreau, and especially the idea of he wanted to speak a word for nature. And so as I began working on these particular phrases, phrases like this one, "Everybody Knows Everything," which is the title of this show, I began to think of them through this particular lens of Thoreau. Actually, like, what if you really could sort of speak for nature? What would nature say? What would nature say to us if we were sort of in a position to listen and nature were in a position to speak on the wall? What might that look like? And so that actually became kind of the basis for the series, thinking about these different possibilities. And I'll tell you candidly, I'm standing here in front of a bunch of students, so I feel like I'll be pretty open with you about my process. This, frankly, has been one of the more difficult series for me to work on. Like when I showed you those resin drawings, a typical drawing of resin takes me about 2 to 3 months, to work on. I'm working on multiples, but dozens of hours certainly. Each drawing takes several hours. A piece like this is much, much faster for me. And frankly, the danger for me in this, or the uncertainty about this, was learning how to trust this. Could I trust this thing? They were very fast. They're very quick. And so that was a bit of a challenge about working on this series. It was a series that kind of happened spontaneously. I had this phrase, the phrase that kind of started the whole series. There's a version of this. This is not the version that's in your gallery. This is actually an earlier version of the Nature Speaks series, the first one. I started working on this. This was actually a phrase that I remembered back when I used to work construction. 17 years ago, when I was working construction, I've been teaching 17 years, I remember this one guy who was a cabinet maker. He's a fabulous cabinet maker. Walked into his shop one day, and this is what he said to me. He's like pointing out his handiwork. He says, "I can make this tree do any damn thing I want." And I mean, he was so proud. And it was a beautiful thing that he did. And I really sort of loved that phrase, and it's sort of one of those things that stuck me. I also do some writing from time to time. So to me, it felt very poetic. And when I started thinking about this idea of nature speaking, what would nature speak? This was actually kind of the phrase that popped up for me. I don't know if you sort of took in part of, the writing about, that's back there, but the material. Does anyone know what the branches are that I'm using? No? I might not have actually included that. That's an important element. The branches are actually buckthorn. Does anyone know what buckthorn is? No? It's an invasive tree species. You come up to Minnesota. I don't know how it is down here. You come up to Minnesota, you go to Bethel University, and pretty much about half the campus is buckthorn. Half the campus is this stuff right here. It's right up there with Eurasian milfoil, zebra mussels, that goofy carp that's swimming up the Chicago River now. All of that stuff. They're all sort of invasive species. So when I started working on this particular series, I needed some wood. And I needed some wood that I could use and cut down a lot of it where nobody would get angry with me, which is how I start a lot of my projects. Get a lot of materials that you can have for free. And so I collected all this buckthorn, brought it back, and it worked really well. And it was one of those moments, like the piece was up on the wall, and then I started really thinking about this phrase. I think our mind sort of plays games with us sometimes. It certainly does with me. I can make this tree do any damn thing I want. It's like, really, you can make buckthorn do any damn thing you want. It's like, people imported this tree, this shrub, into the United States for years and years and years, and used it in gardens because it grows terrifically well. And guess what? It grows so well that now it's everywhere. It's taking over entirely. And so that was kind of the impetus for the whole series. That we have this material, we have this thing that we think we can control. We think we can get our arms around it, but yet we really can't. It's like, and it became a very interesting thing for me to play around with, where I could start to develop these phrases, pieces like this that would maybe challenge, that maybe would have multiple viewpoints, where the phrase could be someone that maybe a person is speaking that, maybe nature is speaking that. And some of these actually got kind of belligerent. I can make this tree do any damn thing I want it's actually a fairly belligerent statement in some context. The way that the cabinet maker was talking to me about it, It was not. It was just like a moment of pride. But in another context, it really is a fairly, arrogant and self-righteous kind of statement. So a lot of these. Oh, by the way, this is the postcard for my next show, Beautiful Dreamer. Believing makes it truer. A lot of these are challenging, and like I said, I do tend to, it takes me a fairly short time to make these, but it takes me a long time to kind of develop these phrases. I try to find these phrases that sort of balance on this knife edge of, you don't quite, like multiple people could be saying this, it could mean multiple things from multiple different perspectives. This was one that was just up in a show up at St. John's University in Minnesota. Can you read what that one says? I'm going to say a bad word. It says, "This whole goddamn place used to be a forest." And this was a piece that was juried into a show about the environment. It was all works about an environmental corridor that goes between like Minneapolis and Detroit. And this was, I had the piece, I'd done a version of this in my studio, and I sent it to the curator, and they liked it, and so they included it in the show. The really cool thing about this piece is they gave me this 40-foot wall to install it on, where previously I couldn't believe they did that. It was one of those things where I walked into the gallery, and they said, "Where would you like to put it?" And I said, it's like, just with a straight face, okay, well, I'd like this whole wall. And they said, okay. So I installed it quick and got the heck out of there. So. And so it's actually like it's about a 35-foot piece. Kind of works, again, it's sort of a phrase that works from multiple viewpoints. Different phrases, it could mean different things. I do always like to have the potential within these works that it actually could be a phrase that nature is speaking back to us. Almost all of these are quotes, these phrases that I'm finding, almost all of them are quotes that I've found here and there. But I am pretty interested in this idea of sort of nature speaking back to us, and what would that look like? As part of this series, I began to think a lot about this idea of ownership, and how we tend to look at nature as owners of it in a way. Even sort of like the garden metaphor, and how the garden metaphor actually, on the one hand, it can bring about good results, because if you got a garden, you take care of it, which is something we desperately need right now. We need to start to take care of the garden that's around us. But on the other hand, the idea of the garden can really imply a sense of ownership in which we try to control more than perhaps we ought to. And so what I was interested in kind of exploring in these was this idea that true wildness, like Thoreau is talking about, is not just wildness that looks nice. It's not just picture postcard wildness. It's actually a form of wildness that we really don't understand very much. It's a form of wildness that perhaps requires humility. I don't know if you've read Annie Dillard, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. There's a fabulous book by a Christian writer, Annie Dillard, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. She has a phrase that kind of keeps revolving in my mind as I think about my relationship to nature. And I love this question. It's a bit of a paraphrase. She says, we always believe that nature speaks to us about who God is. Well, what does it say about God that 60% of the creatures in the world are parasites? It's like, man, I love that question because it's so hard. It demands humility from me. It demands humility to kind of understand what that really means. There's complexity there. It's not just a thing of like, look at the mountain, ain't it pretty? Yeah, it is. Of course it is. But I think I'm more interested, in a relationship to nature that respects the fact that we don't know very much, that we don't know a lot. So, anybody bothered by this phrase? You can maybe come back to that. I got in a little bit of trouble over that phrase. Another one from the same essay. This is actually an interesting thing that's happened. I put together a proposal, and so over this next couple of months in Minneapolis, there's going to be I'm installing this piece, which is actually in a pretty cool spot. It's at a storefront downtown St. Paul. It kind of looks out over part of the city. And the phrase the essay that I talked to you about, which is Thoreau's Walking, there's a quote later on where Thoreau is talking about North America, and I'm going to read you this quote. He says, in both the northern and southern hemisphere of the New World, which would be America, nature has not only outlined her works on a larger scale, but has painted the whole picture with brighter and more costly colors than she used in delineating and in beautifying the old world, which would be Europe. So the heavens in America appear infinitely higher, the sky is bluer, the air is fresher, the cold is intenser, the moon looks larger, the stars are brighter, the thunder is louder, the lightning is vivider, the wind is stronger, the rain is heavier, the mountains are higher, the river's larger, the forest bigger, the plains broader. He loved America. So, and he, to me, that kind of speaks about that sense of wonder. That there is a thing that, in the way that Thoreau is talking in his essay, he's not just sort of talking about wandering around, although he did do a lot of that. He was a big advocate of sort of getting out of nature, but I think he was about connecting us to that sense of wonder, the importance of that sense of wonder and that sense of mystery. And I think sometimes that can be a bit lost when we had this garden-like attitude, towards nature. So a lot of what these are about, and frankly, I mean, I'm showing you some of these. There are others that I sort of pitched at other places, that are where the language, would have to be in a really specific context. You wouldn't just sort of want to be tossing them out there. The language is very hard and very sharp, becoming very antagonistic. So, anyhow, I started to talk about this. This is what I used to get the commission, a bit of a mock-up that I did in the studio. So this is part of the work. I'm taking just the key words from the Thoreau essay, which I liked a lot. Because they kind of look like advertising. If you just sort of think about those phrases, they feel like you're selling laundry soap or something, I don't know. But at the same time, he's talking about America. And so it's, in a way, like a lot of the other works, they could be sort of be authentic, they could be parody, something that I'm kind of drawn to. So, move on to some next couple of pieces. I have wandered through a lot of materials, and I showed you initially the first couple of pieces that I did, which were the resin. I really appreciate resin. I don't have any problem using it because it's synthetic. It's like I really don't. But I really love sort of dealing with natural materials in this other series. And so a lot of the other works that we're going to be looking at have really natural materials. These are actually ostrich eggs, and so this, they're like this big. And I did a couple of pieces using eggs and using imagery from, do you know the Pathfinder spacecraft? Anyone? Yeah? Where did that one? That was Mars, yeah. Pathfinder wandered around Mars a little bit. You can get on the NASA website and you can find those pictures, and you can actually find the 360 images of the Martian landscape. So that's actually what I did for this particular piece. If you wander around this piece, this is actually a piece of the Martian landscape, sort of rendered in two different, rendered on these ostrich eggs. It's just like, it's etched in there, and people ask me how I do my stuff. It's like, yeah, it's pretty easy to do this kind of stuff. You just experiment forever, and then you finally figure it out. So it's not a difficult process. You just invest your life in it, and then it becomes easy. So. Another version of this one, which I did, showed at a gallery about a year ago. Much more complex version, Scape. Again, these are all sort of real places on Mars that have only been sort of transmitted back to us via technology. So you got this little craft that's sort of wandering over the Martian landscape, sending these images back, and then Ken gets a hold of them and kind of renders these. These are all actual eggs, by the way, ranging from little, eggs that are maybe like an inch tall, quail eggs, up to like the largest ones here are goose eggs, which are like sort of, this big-ish. Actually sort of work with them, and by the way, yeah, how do you do this? You buy twice as many as you need because you break a lot of them. That's how you do this. But they're all our actual landscapes. I got pretty interested in this particular piece with this idea of perception and and sort of looking around a 360 viewpoint. And this idea that through technology we're able to sort of be places or implant this idea of perception. It's this very potent kind of thing, plant this idea of perception in this place which is completely barren. I don't know about you, but when I've seen those images of the Martian landscape, it just looks like, beyond desolate. I mean, they're just so lonely. I can hardly believe it. This poor machine is up there forever now, kind of stuck wandering the landscape. I kind of feel bad for it, but just these really desolate places. And I love this idea that the perception has a sort of pregnancy to it. This perception has all of this potential to it. One of the things that happened, I showed this piece last year, and I put it in storage, and then I brought it out because I was thinking that I might send it for this show. Josh decided not to take it anyway, but I was kind of checking on the status of this piece, so I took it out, and virtually all of these eggs had cracked. So you're pretty much looking at the only version of this thing that exists. Oh well. Another idea, dealing with sort of nature and control. This is like a full-size moose horn. You know how big moose horns are? They're about this big. They're big. You know, like this probably weighs 14, 15, maybe close to 20 pounds, this one right here. Again, a lot of these, you know, there's sort of interplay between sort of nature and control, you know, allowing nature to have some sort of spontaneity, thinking about what this idea of control, this idea of control means. In this particular piece, the pattern that weaves over this piece, it covers the thing entirely. It's carved in. And when I did this, I actually started right about like this one right there. I remember it took me a long time. I started with this one right here, and I took this pattern, and I essentially just wrapped it around the form. And so you see like right in here where the pattern doesn't work, it doesn't mesh. What actually happens here is I started on one point, I took that pattern and I wrapped it all the way around, and then when I came back, the distortions of the form wouldn't allow it to join with itself. And so what this is how the pattern doesn't work. So you have this really analytical, it's literally black and white. It's a carved moose horn. It's actually carved very deeply, which you probably can't see in this thing. It's actually painted with black fingernail polish. A little bit goth there, apparently. So, but it's all about how these things don't work together. You know, how you're taking this one system, which is really analytical, it's really hard edge, and it's sort of applied to this thing, and the way that they don't fit together, the way that they actually, there's conflict there, but actually there's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of really interesting intersections there. So the collisions for me, frankly, are some of the more interesting parts of this one. The pattern actually came from the floor of the Taj Mahal. So you can, I was there a couple years ago and I saw it, but I actually, when I drew this pattern, I was really interested in this idea for a couple of reasons. There's some pretty interesting kind of gender things that happen back and forth in terms of the Taj Mahal and the imagery that's used in this. Taj actually means crown in Hindi, you know, in that language that was used at the time. The Taj Mahal was actually a mausoleum that was built by, you know, an individual for his wife. You know, so there's some kind of interesting back and forth parallels with gender, but actually I was most interested in this idea of collision and how things don't fit together very well. Any questions so far? I know that I've just been going. Yes, Steve? Yeah. eBay. Yeah. So. But here's the thing: you got to do it at a certain time of year, because like there's like a limited window when you can get them, and then they're gone. So, and you can get a lot of them. Okay. Other questions?
I'm a little bit curious about the go back to the landscape one.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
What's the how did you decide what form the cone would be that's holding up against? Because it seems like it's not consistent. You know, it sort of seems maybe just based on the shape or size of the egg. It seems sort of reminded of like when you're looking at Google Maps early on.
Mm-hmm.
You find these like blind zones where
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't see anything. It was just like a black like pentagon or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So.
Yeah, part of it was just pragmatic. You need something to hold them up. But I was actually really drawn to this idea of like the rocket cone, you know, like this idea of propulsion, and it's really understated. You know, it's hard to see. There's a little bit of texturing, paint texturing on the cone part. But I kind of wanted them to sort of be hovering there, a little bit of that rocket cone thing that you see like in the old Apollo rockets, you know, that kind of stuff. So. Yes, yeah, they were, which actually turned out to be the problem, because I'd filled in with all this stuff. Okay, so like we're among friends here, among fellow artists, so I can tell you these little details. I lacquered them, and then I filled them with something, and there was a reaction between the two, and so they all just like completely exploded. So I've got like 6. So I've got a great little show of 6 of these things now. But it is lacquered. No, but I still have them, so there's that potential. Good, thanks. Other questions? Please. Yes?
Are you going to go back to that phrase and the restaurant phrase, recycle?
We can do that right now.
Why did you go in
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a really great question, and that is, I'm not above sort of, as a guy who writes, I'm not above sort of tossing out a phrase there to get somebody's attention. My dad was a contractor. I was a contractor before I was a teacher, and so this is a phrase that, for me, it really doesn't have sort of the impact. But to take that word and to put that word in a Catholic university, I mean, that's looking for a reaction. So why do you think? Why does anybody think? Somebody else?
Well, I mean, it certainly gives it a specific character.
Yeah.
That's where I go when you were talking about having different voices.
Yeah.
So I sort of imagine particular types of characters saying this and sort of
Mm-hmm.
thinking about different people saying this because
Yeah.
it is, at least the sentiment is something that I feel like I've heard from multiple different sources.
Yeah.
Just sort of like pinpoint a specific character in that phrase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly does define a character. Yeah. And that would be part of it. Yeah, John.
Both in this show here and in this piece, it struck me that it's about a particular attitude that views nature in a way that is simply something to be used. So to say that the whole goddamn place used to be a forest is kind of like it's the attitude that someone who would simply clear cut the forest would have about that forest. And it's in some ways it might be the only way you could make it be that succinct and that powerful. But it struck me as a specifically sinful attitude that would perpetuate that sort of
kind of reference?
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
I guess to me it seems kind of like the use of God and all that stuff kind of takes away like when I first went into the gallery, seeing the words, it kind of like presented a whimsical to me, but then when I saw the language and everything, then it kind of carried it in a more calloused feel, which then created this balance that was very serious but still very beautiful at the same time. I really respect it.
So a certain gravitas to the language, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, anybody else? These are great comments. A couple things that I was thinking about the phrase is that I've actually heard similar things like that from people who were sort of lamenting the loss of forest, and also people who were commending the growth of, housing. It's like, could you believe this whole, place used to be a forest? And now look what we got, We got industry. So, and so, again, I sort of like the duality of that phrase. I like the brutality of that phrase. And I'll maybe toss something out here. I actually don't think that that's profanity. Like, if I say it's not profanity, do you read it in a different way? And I don't mean I know goddamn is a profane word, but I'm saying in this, there's a way to read this in which that phrase is no longer profane. And that is, maybe God really did damn the land. Maybe the curse of Adam is, part of this is about the curse of Adam. This whole goddamn place used to be a forest. Look at it now. There's a sense of loss there. Does that make sense? Maybe. You're not going to ride me out of here on a rail? Maybe? Okay. Well, we'll keep going. Thanks. Good questions. It helps a guy that's been spending a lot of time by himself the last couple months. Wow. How do we get here? Scrimshaw. Anyone know about Scrimshaw? A little bit? Oh, you're from out east, aren't you?
Not originally,
Oh, okay. Most people that do have some sort of connection out east. Scrimshaw is an art form that spontaneously, it's a folk art, it's an art form that spontaneously emerged in the mid-Atlantic on whaling ships in like 1650 to 1850, about 1900 would be the end of it. It's made by sort of scratching on a whale tooth. There's a whale tooth. It's also done on elephant ivory. The subject of most scrimshaw are things like this or things like this. Places back home, they're commemorative. They're about memory. They're about sort of seeing things in the mind's eye. Again, obviously pre-photography. These are folks almost all untrained. There are some who are highly trained who became very, very good, but for the most part, a lot of the folks that sort of guys or men, a lot of the men that started this, would have been largely untrained, unskilled, laborers working under brutal conditions, and they would maybe have like one or two of these in their pockets at the end of a voyage. They were commodities they were essentially making that were about commemorating particular times and locations. So I got interested in scrimshaw. And the particular series that I worked on, I'm going to show you about 6 or 8 pieces here, is a series I've titled the Memoria Animus. And these are all locations that I've actually been to. I don't know if you know anything about topographical maps that show elevation rather than names of things. You use them a lot if you're hiking or you go up into like wilderness areas. You use maps like this. Can anyone tell what the material that I'm drawing is? Because I'm actually drawing on traditional scrimshaw materials. Yeah, they're piano ivories. They're discarded piano ivories. So, where do you get discarded piano ivories? eBay. There you go. Yep. The drawings that I'm making here are locations that I've been to, but I'm actually not drawing them from maps. I'm drawing them from memory. And so, very similar to how the original scrimshanders, as they were known, would be working on these things. They're drawing from memory. They're just doing the best they can. I'm only drawing these locations from memory. These are places that I've been to. Most of the time, they're like 15, 20 years ago. Some of these locations that I've been to, I was there like 2 hours 20 years ago. Like this particular lake, Stormy Lake, I was there for 1 day 10 years ago. And tried to render it as faithfully as I could. Remembering all of this landscape, trying to figure out what all of this was. The Memoria Animus, the title of the whole series, 2 Latin words. Memoria means that contrivance for aiding the memory or to try to remember. Animus, I really like the idea of animus, which is an intense dislike, hatred, or animosity. But it also has other qualities to it as well. It's a multi-pronged word, mode of intention or purpose, the masculine principle present in the female unconscious. Things that I was pretty interested in when I was working on these is this idea of memory and how much we can remember, what we do remember from the places that we've been to. I've been here. I had part of these were fishing, part of these were just me and my dad would sort of get in the boat and go where we wanted to go when we got bored with fishing. And we would just explore, very much like the early explorers. We would go to places we hadn't been to before. And so here I am 20 years later, 15 years later, trying to put physical form to this, trying to describe this in ways that are sort of map-like, they're scientific, they're more analytical. Again, this idea of sort of, you had this organic thing out here and you're trying to have an intersection with that, with a more analytical or a more scientific way of doing this. So. These are very small. Most of these drawings, like the biggest one, like this one is maybe like this big. They're not very big. They're very intimate. The lines are crazy close together. They take forever to draw. This is much more typical of the kind of stuff I do. So you can see like doing these and then doing the branches in the other room. It's a bit of a stretch. So. Tramping Lake. To give you an idea of how well my memory intersects with the real thing, This is my interpretation of Tramping Lake. And this is the actual map. So. What's really interesting about this is I have these maps because we bought maps every place that we went. A place called Blind Bay. But what's really interesting about this is even sort of seeing the real map, it doesn't dislodge my memories at all. You know, it's like I have these memories; they're part of who I am. They're this really organic part of who I've become over the last 20 years. I've sort of built portions of my life on these memories, and yet, how well does that really intersect with, what's really out there? I don't think it's, it's certainly a construct, I guess, is the thing that I'm finding pretty interesting. So. Leaf Rapids. This one is Rainy Lake. These are wildly out of scale with each other too. Like this one would, like this whole map would probably fit. Right here. So I don't make any attempt to keep them, to insist that they all sort of follow any rules. They really are just sort of maps of memories, trying to play around with that idea, create something beautiful out of it. It's a piece called Mose Island. This is just actually about as big as Mose Island really is. So Mose Island is just like a rock in the middle of it. It literally is just like an X. It's a rock in the middle of this lake. So, that sticks up just enough so you can hit it. So. Okay, well, I thought we would talk about this guy for a minute. Borges, George Luis Borges. Now, the person who set up she's not here? I talked with her earlier because she said it was her birthday. And I wanted to tell her that it's actually also Borges' birthday today, too. I forgot to tell her that. So she did a fabulous job. If you went on my website and you kind of poked around at this a little bit, you would find a link that would take you to this Borges story for Pierre Menard, author of the Don Quixote. It's a well-known Borges story that I fell in love with. Essentially, the story that Borges wrote was there was a guy named Pierre Menard who decided that he wanted to undertake a life's work, and so the life's work that he decided to undertake was to write the Don Quixote. Okay, he knew that it had already been written. He was not trying to copy it in the way that a religious scribe would try to copy a text. What he wanted to do was to authentically change his life to the point where he could then write the Don Quixote as Pierre Menard and not Cervantes. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, let's face it, it's a very absurd kind of thing. But towards the end of his life, he actually does kind of manage to spit out a few paragraphs that do duplicate the Cervantes story. And so it's a very whimsical story, typical of what Borges is about. But it has to do with this idea of copying. Like, what does it mean to copy something? And if you make one of something, what does it mean to make the next thing? Which is actually what I really was drawn to in this particular piece and the piece in the gallery, was this idea that the first pile of sticks is something we don't really care about, do we? Until you see the second one. And then suddenly the first one becomes very important. And it's just, in a similar way, the way how Borges talks about, this Pierre Menard, who in seeking to kind of create this, the second version somehow changes how we see the first one. So, I thought she did a fabulous job installing this piece. I really couldn't. I think she did a better job than I did when I installed it the last time I showed it. So congratulations. A couple of details of the individual sticks. I did almost all of the carving on the piece, but I did have a couple different TAs, interns. Actually, they were interns. I paid them, who worked for me, and I knew that I was getting done with the piece when both of them refused to work on it anymore. I completely burned them out. It was so funny. So they literally just they would just show up and they would just look at it. It's okay. Well, we'll move on. We'll do something else. But it was about done at that point anyway. So. All right, well, we're getting to the end, so I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about this is the one that I just finished up. You tell what that is? Yeah. You totally did that? This is the one detail shot of it. This is the one I can't decide if I'm going to put in my show on Saturday or not, because I just finished this one up. I think I will. Yeah. The theme of the show that I'm doing is it's about sort of material content and how materials can bring voice, can bring a particular voice to a work. How the content of a material, the history of a material is a really important element in the work. So the history of this, these are actually materials, these are pencils that I carved, by the way. These are not like actual pencils. These are pencils that I carved. And the wood, okay, we're among friends here. I stole this wood. And I stole this wood from the tree outside Charles Lindbergh's childhood home. I was there, I paid the money, I went in with the intent of stealing that wood. And I did. When I got there, I went halfway through the tour, I ducked out the back door, and I hijacked some wood from Charles Lindbergh's. Charles Lindbergh was the first guy to fly across the Atlantic, solo flights. But I mean, it's not like I was like ripping this branch off the tree, okay? It was on the ground, it was there. I was fortunate enough to find a branch that was ideal. All I had to do was sort of like wait till nobody was looking, and then I was golden, so that's what I did. And I was pretty interested in, I mean, I will tell you candidly, I don't really know all of the qualities of what this piece is about right now. I'm still sort of processing it. I really like this idea of flight. You know, Charles Lindbergh, while he had some notable achievements in his life, he was still bound by gravity, you know? And I like this idea of you know, these objects sort of being flung up. It's a bit of an iconoclastic piece in the way that some of the text pieces are kind of iconoclastic. You know, it's a sort of this flinging motion of putting things up, having them stick, you know, a certain kind of success, a certain mischievousness, which I like about that. So anyway, it's about, I think I went about 45 minutes, which is what I was shooting for. So questions, I'd love to take some questions if you had some more questions.
Specific memory connected to this thesis particularly. It really caused a lot of memory to flood back for me. Middle school particularly,
Yeah.
Which were hated years.
Yeah.
And like why the compulsion to try to throw your pencil up and make it seem as silly existed at all.
Yeah, and not get caught.
But not
Yeah.
get caught, but then why did it exist at all?
Yeah.
What is it in the mind of a 12-year-old that makes that seem like some kind of achievement or a good idea?
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you have any. So strangely, it rushed back.
Yeah.
Right, sat down by that.
Well, it was,
Did you connect anything?
you know, it was interesting. This piece, and I got to admit to a little trickery. This piece installed on the wall of my gallery at my studio at home right now, and so I just like turned it so you see it on the ceiling. But I had 3 different people over to help me pick out the work for this show, and all 3 of them, independent of each other, said it really should be the ceiling. You know, so I think you're right.
Okay. I assume they were because of each other.
Yeah, and you know, and then finally, okay, I'm a slow learner, I admit it, but finally by the 3rd person, I was like, yeah, I really was honest. So, not just because they said so, but because of that action was such a, you know, for all 3 of them, and for myself included, I think that was a really primary sort of visceral sort of experience. That, you know, the puncture and vandalism, you know, I don't know, the challenge for me in this story is I'm not quite sure how firmly to connect this to Charles Lindbergh. You know, because he's a Minnesota guy. You know, he's in northern Minnesota. He's this guy that essentially was sort of brilliant mechanically. And so he thought, you know, I can design a plane that can cross, you know, the ocean. I can do that. You know, so we just did it, you know. And his house is full of all these little inventions that he did. And his house is also full of, you know, literally like gunshots that he like shot through, you know, like a kitchen. There's still a bullet hole in the kitchen. I mean, this was a bit of the Wild West in this guy. And he kind of struck me as somebody that would definitely do this. I don't know how firmly I want to connect that to the piece, because a piece seems to me like it works a little bit better if I think about it in terms of like aviation and a certain kind of limitation that way.
Again, I'm thinking about why do it.
Yeah.
There's something about the inaccessibility of the ceiling.
Yeah.
In other words, you scroll on the wall, it can be painted over.
Yeah.
There's something about the act that has a sort of sticking power.
Yeah, that's true.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
That, you know, you can leave your mark, and for a certain period of time, especially in a cafeteria, you know,
Yeah.
I had this cafeteria that had like 25-foot ceiling, and that was the ultimate goal of achievement, was one up there, because you could see it there for a year.
This is good.
But I mean, that thing connected to
Yeah.
Lindbergh as well, this idea of insurmountable achievement.
Yeah. Also, for me, you know, one of the things that finally, like when finally the third person said it really needs to be in the ceiling, I started thinking about this vertical action as opposed to a horizontal action. That Lindbergh was really essentially a horizontal thing, but he wasn't sort of able to sort of do this other thing, you know? That was part of it for me. Yeah. He's an interesting figure. I've got some other, actually coming back to the resin drawings, I've got some drawings that I'm doing of his house because he was very conflicted. You know, he left a very mixed legacy. Yeah, question?
I want to go back a little bit to the map pieces that you
Yeah.
did. Yeah, you talked about them in terms of really an analytic construct, I think are the words that you use. And
Mhm.
I guess I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about your choice of piano keys. Because, you know, I get the connection of the technique and the history of that with ivory.
Yeah.
But to me, specifically using found, if you will, piano keys, really layers it again in a very beautifully rich way.
Mhm.
And it really takes it, for me,
Yeah.
totally away from anything analytical.
Yeah.
So to me, there's this also, again, then this beautiful kind of tension there between how you talk about it and how I experience it in some ways. And also, you know, visualizing, not being able to recall or even know what this map exactly is, but recognizing it as a topographic map and recognizing that as something more didactic
Mhm.
and having it scrawl across these very imperfect musical memories themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, they are a tiny bit grid-like, which is, you know, one of the qualities that I liked about them. I think you know, two places where I really started with that. One was that it's like a material that actually physically connects me to this tradition. It's like this material was harvested, you know, elephant ivory. This would have come over on the ships where they would have been making scrimshaw. I mean, this stuff is all, because I don't know if you know this, but you can't buy ivory anymore. It's like you haven't been able to, for 110 years you haven't been able to, which means that all of this stuff is at least 110 years old, and probably a lot of it's closer to 200 years old. And so actually part of it was just like that physical connection. You know, just like this stuff was there. This was the real deal. You know, it was here. And also that tactile sense, you know, because these drawings are, in a large sense, not about sort of, you know, seeing something. It's about sort of being there and touching something and trying to recall it years later. And so there's this tactile thing. The piano keys, a lot of them are worn down by just years and years and years of touching. You know, they're sort of cupped the way that stairs get when they're walked on a lot. And that tactile nature, that touching thing was really important. I wanted these memories to really feel like they were sort of lodged in these organic depositories. You know, even the way that, like, I'm drawing things, you know, these start to look very cellular, almost like neurons. I mean, that's a pretty intentional choice, you know, that I'm making with a lot of these. You know, they're starting to almost look like they could be cellular, you know, like of cells, the way that memories are sort of stored in these things. So I wanted them, you know, the synthetic material just felt very cold to me. In terms of the piano, I did like, that idea of music and, the potential for music to kind of be a layer there. It's not, to me, the first thing that pops up. I guess I was more interested in just this tactile quality, this human quality, the fact that these things were just touched and touched and touched and touched, the way that these landscapes, were touched. These are drawings that come out of tactile experiences. Does that kind of address that question? Great question, though. Thanks. Other questions? Yeah.
Going back to the eggs,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about how this was a desolate landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Were you thinking at all about like how an egg is like the beginning of life and how like in desolation there can also be life at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very definitely. Yeah, and to me, it's putting these things or the combination of these landscapes which are so bleak, and they're not only sort of dead, they don't have any potential for life at all, and the absurd kind of paradox of having this egg there, which is, I use the word pregnant. I think there's certain kind of pregnancy of this perception or the potential for growth, or this kind of potential. That was very definitely a tension that I was liking in the piece. And the fact that also it's related to a 360 perception. So these are, the way that these photos are made is that you take a camera and you run it all the way around so you can see 360. And so what I've done is I've taken that thing, which is an outward-looking thing, and I've turned it into an inward-looking visual experience. To me, that idea of perception and looking, I like that becomes a very, a moment of possibility of pregnancy. So that's a nice reading. Thanks.
Sort of the irony is that these are all without a doubt unfertilized eggs.
Yeah, it is.
It's a word. They were potential.
Mm-hmm.
The potential.
The potential is there. Hey, now you on question?
Yeah. I just think it's really interesting too how all of these separate pieces are all kind of a collection of organized of places you've been, or I don't know, almost like a timeline of all these places that you've been or would like to go, including the Taj Mahal, like I've seen years back, and it's just really interesting to me. I don't know if you could touch on that, like as far as like these memories ongoing, connecting all of your pieces.
There's a real powerful book for me called Landscape and Memory by a guy named Simon Schama. And a basic principle of this book is that landscape without perception is just dirt. Landscape, the very definition of landscape is always connected to memory. It's always connected to history, both personal and larger cultural. That these things are inextricable. You can't really separate these. And I just find it to be a pretty interesting fodder. I just love thinking about, how the land can talk. The different things that materials can say, the different things that lands can say. You can't really sort of pull anything out of that context. The more you try to sort of separate a material out, the louder it seems to scream about its own identity. I find that really fascinating. This idea of context, that you can't sort of take it out of that context. So, yeah, other question.
We were just wondering why you left the N out of dam, or if there is, I don't know if it's just commonly spelled both ways or not, but if there was any reason behind that.
I occasionally I have typos in the works. Like, I don't know if you noticed, Finders Keepers has 3 E's in it also. Occasionally I put typos in there because you find, certain randomness in nature. I wish I had a smart answer, but the dumb answer is I just didn't like it. I had it in there with the N, and it just looked it didn't look expressive enough. It didn't look like a 13-year-old kid would write it that way, And these are not pieces that are really, the emotional content here is really sort of, it's gut level, it's really violent, it's the middle finger, it's, there's something of that, and I just didn't have that punch. So, yeah, other question? Yeah, you. Mm-hmm.
It's basically the same question, because I noticed that too, and then what I thought of when I saw that was that that's a small dam, like a beaver dam. Mm-hmm. And that's, obviously the type that you have made out of wood is something that you would find compilation in a beaver dam. So, you said we're not really making that connection, or necessarily more of a...
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think necessarily going right to that spot, but yeah. Good question. Other questions? Yeah.
Just an observation. It seems to me that in the text pieces and in the pencils, that there's this content that is real gravitas. And if you talk about it, there's a way to talk about it that would feel really heavy and sort of overwhelming.
Yeah.
And the kind of whimsy of both of the pencils and the acting comes from. But these plays and
Yeah.
the flew out and all that stuff. And it, just the way they look, and the whole reference to the school, and the twigs sticking out all over the place,
Yeah.
gives the work this kind of lightness that makes it on the one hand really accessible, and then gradually you kind of get to that place where you start to think about the kind of deeper stuff. And they have work that functions with that level of whimsy, but talk about really serious issues. I think it's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, the humor I find is important. I definitely have a dark quality to my personality, and it's like I do way better if I try to be funnier. So great. Yeah, Katie.
Pencils aren't real pencils?
They're not real pencils. Well, they're made from the wood that I stole from the Charles Lindbergh estate. Yeah. So I carved each one of those and painted them.
So it's not brass and razor, it's hardwood.
That's right. It's all just painted wood. I can get to it here. Oh, I didn't realize that was so far away. Nope. Nope. Now it's going to save it for me. Yeah, so it's all painted wood. Carved and painted wood. Good. Other questions? I think we're probably about done, but okay. Well, thanks very much. That was a lot of fun.